I always felt like there were eyes on me. Like there were always like people like looking at me, people trying to touch me. Step outside of my house and I would be followed. I would be photographed. People would try to touch me. People would try to see like where I was going. I've been reported to the police. Many different things that were happening when I was living there. Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am so excited to talk to you guys today a little bit about something that has been a part of my studio practice, I would say, over the past 4 years. So I've been getting a lot of questions about the figures that I usually either collage or paint or sew in my work, and I wanted to tell you guys about them because they have really taken up such a beautiful place in my life and have allowed me to express myself in ways that I didn't even foresee when I first began making artwork. I guess I would just have to like go back a couple of years before I can even explain sort of like how they have emerged now and like what they mean to me now. When I first began creating my Alibi figure, I was living in China and I was working on oil painting and felt really constricted by just how slow drying oil painting is. And at that time I was sort of self-taught. I wasn't studying yet. I didn't get my master's degree in contemporary art yet. And so I was at that moment in 2017 still self-taught. I really felt like the oil paintings constricted me from expressing myself as quickly and as creatively as I wanted to, because there was like this limitation on what I could do because I really didn't have the skill to oil paint yet. And so I started looking around, and by the way, I was in China. Living in China, teaching art, as well as trying to like build up my portfolio and create my work on the side. What I did was I just started like looking around me for everyday objects that I could use because I just wanted to make something quickly. And what was laying around, of course, were magazines. And so what I started to do was just to cut up the magazines and to assemble them in ways that were really interesting and dynamic to me. What emerged at that particular time was these figures that at first were just like sort of magazine cutouts, but then having like immersed myself like in the culture, I started to like look at the material that people use in Chinese traditional painting. And so at that particular time I started to use the really dark calligraphy inks, and what I wanted to do was to use the inks in a very different, non-traditional way than Chinese people usually use them in their artworks. I didn't have any understanding or knowledge on how to use them in the correct way, so I figured that I would then take this medium that was really rooted in like Chinese culture and turn it into my own thing. And so what was also happening at that particular time as well was I would step outside of my house and I would be followed, I would be photographed, people would try to touch me, people would try to see like where I was going. I've been reported to the police. Many different things that were happening when I was living there. And so I always felt like there were eyes on me. Like there were always like people like looking at me, people trying to touch me. And I really felt like I needed to create this sort of distance between myself and from the viewer, or like people that were like outside of me in that instance. What I decided that I would do, or to mitigate the way that I was feeling, was I wanted to use my creativity to express these repressed emotions that I was feeling about being so isolated. One, living in China like all by myself. Two, not really understanding the language, being sort of an outsider. Three, being completely different, being black, being a woman, and just someone who did not like relate to the culture as a whole. And so yeah, what I decided to do was to create this sort of distance between myself as the subject and the viewer, which were people that were looking at me. So I decided to create like these layers in the eyes that would sort of like act as containers or like safe space between me and the viewer. So it would be like this distance. And initially when I first began, I was like using eyes from the Chinese magazines. So I would use like Vogue magazines, fashion magazines. So initially when I first began creating the Alibi, they were actually Chinese eyes, because it was almost like the Chinese eyes were looking at me and then I was the figure. And then after the pandemic, like after I decided to move back to the UK, and this was like after all of my training as well, I decided that I wanted to change the eye from being the eye of the viewer to being the eyes of myself as a woman of color. And so the eyes became then like eyes that I would use from women of color, because I wanted to shift that focus, or to shift that gaze from like the outside gaze to like a gaze that more so came from inward. And so the Alibis have always been sort of like fashionable and expressive. I would create like really interesting hairstyles. And what was really cool about like using the Chinese traditional ink on multimedia paper was I was then able to sort of like create these unique patterns and call them like skins. And I really love the empowerment to be able to take a medium that was really rooted in like this different culture and take it and like make it my own. And I felt like it was really interesting that like at that particular time, every time I would step outside my house, like I would be confronted with the fact that I was black. That was like a thing as well. Like I don't think that I ever realized what it means to like walk in the world as a black person or be aware of your blackness as much as when I was living in China. Just constantly there, like all the time, like you're a black person, you're a black person, you're a black person. Oh my god, I've never seen a black person before. Are you famous? Like it was just always that. And that never occurred to me before that blackness could be something that could be of curiosity for people. And so that curiosity that others felt, I then felt like, gosh, like it could be really interesting for me to investigate what it means to be a black person in the world. And so then I could do my own investigation and I could create my own skin. And so I wanted the skin to be really dark, so I would use this traditional Chinese ink and would create the pattern for the skins. And really loved that empowerment, that I would take something that, you know, was of this culture and situate it within, you know, the context of their language, their culture, their heritage, and take this thing and make actual skin, which was the thing that they were most curious about for me. So it just sort of felt like a moment of like empowerment to be able to create this skin. So sometimes you see my alibis, most of the time they show up as black and white skin, because it would be like the juxtaposition between the inks on the paper and then the actual paper itself. And so they became sort of like these humanoid figures that were exciting, and I would like do all kinds of interesting things like with the hair, and then I would also dress them up. I think it was really cool for me to play with that in that instance, because I really love fashion. I've always loved fashion ever since I was a kid, and this sort of felt like I was playing with dolls. They've emerged as like their own thing. They're an entire like side of my practice, an entire way for me to express myself creatively. I love making them, and what I love about them is that, like I said, they've taken on a life of their own, and I just sort of like listen to whatever they want to be. So recently the alibis have emerged like in my most recent exhibition, Not All Has to Be As It Was, where I've used the alibis and transformed them as landlords, is what I'm calling them. They're sort of situated in the exhibition to reimagine who the lords of our lands could have been. So they're sitting as like matriarchal caretakers of the land, reimagining the landscape in Bermuda. And so I love to like use them in a way that allows me to create fictional characters. So they're like not necessarily like humans per se, they're alibis, and so they can show up in the world exactly the way that I want them to show up. And so they're like my fictional character, they're like my alter ego. And the reason why I called them alibis, because people have been asking me this as well, is because I was thinking about the word alibi. It means to like shield and protect, and that was sort of like where they emerged from, this place where they needed protection. They needed this sort of distance between, or I needed this sort of distance between myself and the outside world. And what I decided to do was to add the extra I on the end, because it really made me think about this idea of like double consciousness. the consciousness that I feel within myself, but then also like the consciousness that I have to be aware of in relation to other people, thinking about my blackness. And so that I, it's a metaphor, but it's also like a play on the word itself. So it's the double I for the double consciousness, but then also thinking about the I that I am, and the I that I'm able to come up with and show and express and be in the world. So it's also thinking about like a future I, and reclaim this term like I am, and proclaiming that into the world, because you know, whatever you say after the word I am is like the most powerful thing that any human being can say in this world. And so the alibi, every time I make one of them, it's rooted in that, like, I am this powerful manifestor, or I as this fashion girly, or I as, you know, this incredible artist. And so the alibi has been a way for me to put forth into the world all the things that I want to be, or all the things that I am. When I think about myself as a woman, when I think about myself as a woman of color, as someone who's interested in fashion, who's interested in self-expression and creativity, but also someone who is interested in wellness and mental health. Like, the alibis emerge out of a space thinking about therapy and mental health and mental awareness, and just allowing myself to use my creativity to not only like heal my inner child, but also like allow me to show up in the world exactly as I want to be, and to feel courageous and to feel powerful. And so the alibis are representations of self-actualized women who feel empowered, women who express themselves in the ways in which they want to see themselves in the world. And so I'm excited for everything that they are, and everything that I'm imagining that they will continue to emerge as. And I'm really glad that you guys love them. I do have some of them in my shop, and they're available as prints. Sometimes they show up as collages. Sometimes, like I said, they show up as prints. Sometimes in fabric and textiles as well. But I really am happy that you guys enjoy them. I enjoy them. And yeah, I hope you join me on this journey to see exactly like all that they're going to continue to grow and thrive as. Thanks so much for your questions. And if anybody has any more questions or anything like that, you can shoot me a message, or you can leave a comment. I tend to get back to everybody whenever people message me. I really enjoy your comments. And stay tuned. I'm actually going to be coming out with my first Alibii collection, which you guys will have first access to. I've been working on it for a couple of months, and I'm so excited to share it with you guys. But thank you so much. I hope that we can connect through the Alibii girlies real soon. Peace.